I'd like to welcome everybody along, campaigners against the 8th Amendment, campaigners against violence against women and domestic violence, and campaigners against the water charges and austerity. I see our anti-abortion heckler has gone. He obviously learned a few things when he was here. He didn't know what symphysiotomy was, but I think he knows now. International Women's Day is a very important day with a very proud tradition. It's increasingly being portrayed in the media, however, as a kind of a showcase for successful women. Excuse me. We're being shown women like the CEO of Vodafone, that this is something that we should emulate. But actually, the few baubles that they're showing us shouldn't blind us to the reality that the majority of women on the planet are suffering from poverty, violence and oppression in different forms. And even in the developed world, so-called, like Ireland, Europe and America in particular, women's rights are being thrown backwards with the onslaught against austerity in particular. The origins of International Women's Day, just very briefly, lie not in companies who now send people on International Women's Day events, but in workers' rights and women workers. It was in 1909 when garment workers went on strike in textile factory, struck for 3 months against having to work for 65 hours a week. They won after 3 months struggle, better wages, conditions, and against the sweatshops. A year later, hundreds of those women and their colleagues were burnt alive in the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire. But all around the world, there's women still suffering those very same conditions because of multinational corporations and because of capitalism. Now, last year on International Women's Day, Joan Burton made a very important speech. And in the speech she said, we need more women leaders, we need more women in the room when decisions are being made. But now Joan Burton is in the room, the decisions are being made, and we know whose interests are being made in, and it's not working class women, that's for sure. The poorest women are paying the price for Joan Burton's carrying on of this system and of austerity. One-parent payments are going to be savaged, particularly in July, and a host of maternity leave, back-to-school payments, child benefit, broken promises by the Labour Party are leaving women struggling. The kinds of examples that Sandra gave. The National Women's Council did a survey about austerity where they found that the gender gap had been just thrown aside to bail out the banks, that mother-headed households, lone parents, had paid the price. This is what's happening under Joan Burton and under the Labour Party, and what it really demonstrates is this. It isn't just enough to have a few more women in power, it's what those women represent. And if they represent a continuation of this system, they represent carrying on discrimination against women in reality. Now, last year, the United Nations dressed down the Irish government. They told them that the 8th Amendment and its continuance was medieval, that women were being treated as vessels in Ireland. Over Christmas, we saw a horrific case of a brain-dead, clinically dead pregnant woman whose body was taken over by the medics and the state, and whose family had to go to court to battle for the right to bury their daughter. So even in death, women were being treated as incubators because of the 8th Amendment, which was the reason that was cited by doctors. And yet we had the Labour Party and Sinn Féin. Let's not forget them as well, because Sinn Féin could be in the next government. Where do they stand on women's rights? They trooped in there, they abstained on the fatal fetal abnormalities bill. Apparently they never heard of this problem before that night. And the Labour Party as well. And it seems to me that Sinn Féin are afraid to challenge the Catholic Church in any way, shape or form. And if they don't be told by us, they are behind the curve, they're behind where young people are, they're behind where the majority of working class and ordinary people are who vote for them, well then they will have to learn a very sharp lesson that we won't support Sinn Féin in any way, shape or form until they make progress for women in this country. And neither should we let the Labour Party off the hook. They met last weekend. They took a decision that all of a sudden they're now going to favour a referendum being held to repeal the 8th Amendment whenever they get into government next. Now, all of us here know there's not a snowball's chance in hell of the Labour Party being in government because they're going to be obliterated in the next election. So they should salvage something and repeal the 8th Amendment now. Hold a referendum along with other referendums that they're planning. The idea that the age of the bloody president is more important to have a referendum on than the 8th Amendment is absolutely shocking. We also need extra parliamentary events being organised. We can't rely on the people in Dáil Éireann to respect and develop women's rights. This year, Rosa and other organisations I'd like to thank for taking part organised the abortion pill train event. It was to highlight the hypocrisy of the ongoing 8th Amendment and the availability of these pills. And just as an aside, I'd appeal to any organisations that are advising pregnant women, such as the migrant rape victim last summer, who went through absolute torture in this country. That girl and other women like her should be directed to Women on Web, where these pills are available, and that information should not be hidden from them. And if that means those organisations define the law, that is what has to happen, because laws don't get changed unless they're defied. And if anybody thinks that if we just wait patiently for Joan Burton, Frances Fitzgerald or anybody else to grant us our rights, no. It's protests, it's mass movements like we saw in the X case and other cases. Lastly, it's very important that we reclaim what International Women's Day is about. It's not about having celebrity women, having Beyonce talking to us about feminism and women's equal rights, while they perpetuate a culture, a rape culture, which encourages violence against women and actually endorses it in so many ways. Capitalism goes hand in hand with women's oppression. Malcolm X died 50 years ago. He used the expression capitalism and racism go hand in hand. Well, so too does sexism. Because how could you possibly have equal rights for half the planet when 88 people on the planet have more wealth than 3.5 billion people, according to Oxfam? And the idea that you can liberate half the planet when there's such inequality in resources in that way. The reason that girls don't go to school in third world countries isn't just because of discrimination, it's because they're needed for 4 and 5 hours a day to go and collect water so their families can survive. That's why they can't go to school. And the reason that women are being put, particularly now, with the wars that we see in Syria, in Iraq, and so many places, with ISIS and others, again stems from resource wars, wars for oil, that took place 10 and 20 years ago. We're seeing the fallout now of warlords, of reactionaries and fundamentalists now in control of these regions because of the actions of superpowers. We have to get rid of capitalism if we want to liberate women. And that I would appeal to anybody here today. Please get involved in the struggle against capitalism and for women's equality. Come up to the stall here, leave your name to find out about Rosa meetings which take place on a very regular basis, but also to discuss with us at 3 o'clock at the meeting later. I'm sure Rita will be given the details. We need to win this referendum for marriage equality for all of the reasons. It's not that we love marriage, but we do want equality, and we also want to deal a blow to the Catholic Church in this country. Get yourselves out of people's personal lives. Winning the referendum is an important blow to the Church, and it would also be a demonstration to the rest of the world and to the politicians in Dáil Éireann that they're so behind where progressive attitudes are in this country, and it also strengthens the case for repeal of the 8th Amendment as well. So please, don't just go home, don't just go and have a cup of coffee, leave your name here, pledge to get involved, and come to the meeting after. Thank you.